Last chapter of the book of James, we're finally here. It really didn't take all that long, I don't think, compared to the book of John a few years ago. But in this chapter, James is going to revisit the three primary topics that he has taught in the exhortation to maturity. He's going to give a warning to the rich. He's going to give encouragement for enduring suffering. And he's going to then give a reminder of the prayer of faith. And so we're going to turn this morning to the warning to the rich. Let's go before the throne as we prepare to study this together. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity we have to open your word together. And while this is a somewhat challenging passage for us as those in the world who are probably among the most wealthy, one of the most wealthy nations in the world. And so, Father, this speaks to all of us in a sense, and yet I know from experience here in this church that really we're not suffering from the challenges that James brings to us, but this can just be a word of warning to us that we would not allow these things to affect us. And Father, we ask that you would be with each one here as we open your word, that we would open our hearts before you, and that as we learn together and then prepare to go out into the world this week, that you would help us to live a little bit more like you, a little bit more mature, as James is trying to get across to his readers. Thank you again for this opportunity, and we ask this in Jesus' precious name. Amen. So as we turn this morning, we're going to come to this warning to the rich, and I just want to seed our thinking a little bit before we read the passage and before we dive into the study. But I just want us to maybe just, think. Of course, we're familiar with this. I'm sure we've all studied this before, but just a few things that we can think about. There was a bumper sticker a few years ago. I don't know if you remember this. I don't know, maybe you've had one of these on your car at one point in time. He who dies with the most toys wins. And of course, I don't have that bumper sticker, and I never did, but if you observed the things that I have, you might think that I live by this motto. I have a lot of toys. I have a lot of things that frankly I don't need. Maybe I thought I needed them at one point in time. I can't tell you how many times I'm looking for something and I come across something else that I never even opened. You may have some clothes hanging in your closet that still have the tags on them, and maybe that's because you missed it and you wore them with the tags on, or maybe it's because you just never wore those clothes yet. I'm sure this happens to all of us. Well, I think that one thing we can be assured of is that James does not want us to live with this motto, he who dies with the most toys wins. I think a little bit about the parable of the prodigal son, if you'll remember that, and how the prodigal son, we call him the prodigal, the one who wandered away. He wanted his money from his father. He wanted his father to give him his inheritance before his father died. He just wanted it. Why did he want it? So he could go spend it and live it up and have a good time. And of course, then he went off, and I don't want to preach this whole thing today, but really, at the beginning, this is all about money. In fact, even after the son comes home and he realizes, what he had, even the pigs eat better than I do at my father's house. I could just eat the crumbs off the table, and that would be better than what I'm, experiencing now that I've basically wasted everything. But when he comes home and his father prepares this, he really reframes this parable about it's not about a son who wandered away and wasted his money. No, it's about the return, rejoicing for this redemption, this return of his son. And of course, then the other brother cares more about the money than he does about his father as well. You're wasting all my inheritance. No, the Bible has a lot to say about money and about how we spend our money and how we make our money. You know, Jesus said in Luke chapter 12, take care and be on guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Now we might think, according to the world, we might think that life is about what we have and what we can earn and what kind of car we drive, what kind of house we live in, and you know, how much money we can flip out when we're paying for something, you know, how big our wallet is, how big our bank account is. But it's not, life really isn't about that. The world thinks it is, but it really isn't. Jesus says, take care and be on guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Covetousness. I'm reminded of a verse where Paul's going through a bunch of list of sins, and he comes to the word covetousness, and he says, which is idolatry. Why is it idolatry? It's idolatry because what we're coveting, it becomes more important to us than God. We put something before God because we covet. We so envy, want something. Well, Jesus also tells us in Matthew chapter 16, for what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul? And so what Jesus is telling us there is that our soul and our eternal destination really are much more important than the things we have. And so this is a question of priorities. Now, this passage in James contains some difficult or hard truths. As we read this, it's like it feels like you get beat over the head a little bit. And I don't want us to feel that way this morning. James does get all up in our business, though, doesn't he? He tells us how it is. But I want us to realize this morning that it matters not if you're rich or poor. God has something for you in this passage. See, you can be rich and love money, and you can be poor and love money. Of course, we know that it is the love of money that is the root of all different kinds of sins. The things we value, the things we prioritize above God is the root of all different kinds of sins. Having riches is not evil. I want us to get that very clear here. James is not saying that to be rich is evil. It is not. God is not, it's not so much what our bank account has in it, it's how we got it, the money, and what we do with it that God cares about. And we're going to see that this morning. It's about our priorities and about our contentment with the blessings God has given to us. One other verse before we kind of read the passage and dive in. Paul writes in Philippians 4:11-13, and I don't know, you may know verses. This verse may just come right to mind. Verse 13 about I can do all things through Christ which strengthens me. Just Philippians 4:13. It should pop right into your head. But you know what? Right before that, he says, not that I speak sorry, I get confused with the translations. I'm quoting King James and reading out of the ESV. Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatsoever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And so that verse that we love to quote when we want to say, I can be Superman, is not what that means. It's that I have learned to be content in all the situations that I'm put in, and I can work through all of those situations through him who strengthens me. He gives me the ability. And what does he give me? He gives me contentment. But you see, our priorities are determined or demonstrated by where we spend our resources. And that can be both time and money, really any resource, but those are the two resources. You can't get time back. We're talking about birthdays this morning and aging. We're all aging. I don't care how old you are, you're aging. It's happening. You can't get that time back. Where do we spend our time? That tells us everything about what we care about. And likewise, when we have money, where do we spend our money? What do we do with our money? And that tells us everything about what we really care about. And that is why, in both of those cases, time and money, if we spend it on something that we put before the Lord, and it doesn't mean we can't go buy something, but we put these things before the Lord, it's idolatry. So let's go ahead now and read, and then we're going to dive in and study together. James says in verse 1, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you." Boy, that's something, isn't it? He really gets right down to brass tacks. One thing I want us to notice here is that even though we know that the book of James is addressed to those Jews scattered about, those Jewish Christians, he does not use the word brothers or sisters in this section. I think that James here is making a general observation, and he's not primarily talking to the believers. He's making a proclamation, and what he says certainly should wake us up as believers, but he doesn't say, brothers, you rich brothers should weep and howl. No, I think he's making a general, I don't think he's talking to primarily Christians here. He doesn't exclude Christians, but I think that we need to understand he's saying, in general, you rich should weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Well, I'm going to list about 6 different things that I see happening here in this passage, see James referring to, and might seem like I'm skipping around just a little bit, but hopefully it'll make a certain amount of sense. The first thing there is money must be handled carefully. And it gives us this warning in verse 1. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. There's miseries coming upon them, and he's about to tell them different things. This is really an introductory verse, but he's saying you need to manage your money well. You need to handle your money well. And one thing that's kind of interesting here, and I mentioned this when I was praying a few minutes ago, we are rich. We all are rich. If you may not feel very rich some days, you may not feel rich at all, but truly we are. If you compare the world today with any time in history past, we have abundance. We don't have to ask what we're going to eat today. We might ask what, but it's more of where are we going to go, what restaurant are we going to go to? It's of the abundance we have. Which thing are we going to choose to eat today? Are we going to have chicken? Are we going to have fish? Are we going to have, steak? Because we have abundance. And yet many through history have wondered, will I eat today? Likewise, if you go to any other place on the planet, now there's a few nations, few countries that are very wealthy, but a lot of nations, the vast majority of nations on the planet, do not have the kind of abundance that we have here in America. It's kind of funny, you have these, and we've talked about it, you have these kids today that don't want to work, that want to, live off of some kind of welfare or live off their parents or live off of who knows what. And they complain because they don't get paid enough, the ones that do work. And yet the fact of the matter is that we're not starving. We're just not. I mean, there may be some people who are starving, but that's very, very rare in America. It just is very rare. We are wealthy. Now, we're not, wealthy like what you'd call the filthy rich. None of us are in that category. But relative to even many people that we rub elbows with throughout the week, we have what we need. We're all relatively wealthy. So I just want us to understand that. So in a sense, he's talking to all of us. We all have what we need. We have more than what we need. The second thing I want us to notice here, beginning in verse 2 and in verse 3, is that money will vanish eventually. Money will vanish eventually. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you. It's going to go away at some point. And there's a few different kinds of things. He lists some things there. Your riches have rotted. I don't know, you might be, in that day, agriculture was something of a certain amount of wealth. Agriculture can rot. It's one of the things that happened in the wilderness when the Israelites were wandering. Remember, they were hungry, and what did God provide? He provided something that we don't even know exactly what it was, but he called it manna. And what was the rule for the manna? They would go out and they would gather for that day what they needed, and they would eat that manna that day, and if they tried to save it over till the next day, it would rot. God was trying to teach them, I'll provide what you need. And of course, on Friday, they would gather twice as much because they wouldn't go out and gather on the Sabbath, which was Saturday for them. And so still, though, they could only save it over that one day because of the Sabbath. And God was trying to teach them something. And so, things will go to waste. Your garments are moth-eaten. I mentioned a few minutes ago, you might have clothes in your closet that still have tags that you've never worn. I know we going through our granddaughter's clothes a few months ago, and how many things did we find that she had never worn, and now she's outgrown just because we just didn't get around to getting them out. I don't know, maybe you can identify with that. But your garments are moth-eaten. They'll even rot and waste. Your gold and silver is corroded. One thing that you'll never see, you've heard this before, you'll never see a U-Haul on a hearse. You cannot take it with you. So, you work and you scrimp and you save and you put it away and you die. You can't take it with you. It's kind of interesting, some of these words that James uses here, it almost sounds like what Jesus' words were. In Matthew chapter 6, he says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And so we hear some of those same words about moth and rust or corrosion. And so we have to understand that money will vanish eventually. There's another aspect of this that I think is worth considering. Jesus in Luke chapter 12 is giving a parable about the land of a rich man produced plentifully, and he thought to himself, I've got so much stuff, what am I going to do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. I have so much stuff, I need somewhere to put it. He said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store up all my grain and my goods. In other words, I have so much stuff I don't have room for it, so I need bigger barns so I can store more stuff. For what? For when I die, for the state to come and take it, right? And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Lay up for yourselves treasure in heaven, instead of having these temporal treasures. The third thing I want to notice here is that money can be obtained wrongfully. I said earlier, God cares more about not how much we have, but how we got it and what we do with it. Money can be obtained wrongfully, verse 4 and verse 6. But behold, the wages of laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud. You didn't pay them everything that you promised you'd pay them. I find this interesting. He uses this phrase, are crying out against you. Well, we'll come back to that in a moment. How's that? I forgot. That's another one of the points. Anyway, so we can obtain money by fraud. And then in verse 6, you have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. You know, that's an interesting couple of sentences there. You know, he does not resist you. Part of the reason for that is that often the righteous are unable to resist. Because why? Because they don't have enough money. One of the things that is done very commonly today in court is just, you know, they say the punishment is, the process is the punishment. It doesn't matter if you're found guilty of something or not. If you're dragged through court long enough, you're broke. You're going to owe so much money. But you know, the wealthy have the money to take someone to court and to completely destroy their lives, even if they're not found guilty. And this is something that's done far too often. But because they've, made that decision to condemn them, and even if they're not condemned, they're as good as condemned. And I think that this is probably using the word murder there a little bit hyperbolically. Murdered the righteous. He doesn't have anything left. He's destroyed. The rich take advantage. And I'm not just saying, again, I just want to emphasize that this isn't talking to everyone who has money. This is talking about people who have wealth and obtained it wrongfully or abuse it. They have plenty of money to win whatever court cases they want to, or to apply, whatever pressure they want to. The fourth thing I want to notice there in verse 5 is that money can be used poorly. Money can be used poorly. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. Verse 6, you, again, condemned and murdered the righteous person. There's a passage back in the book of Amos. It says, "Woe to those who lie on beds of ivory and stretch themselves out on their couches and eat lambs from the flock and calves from the midst of the stall, who sing idle songs to the sound of the harp and like David invent for themselves instruments of music, who drink wine in bowls and anoint themselves with the finest oils, but are not grieved over the ruin of Joseph. Therefore they shall now be the first of those who go into exile, and the revelry of those who stretch themselves out shall pass away." When we are more concerned about making ourselves comfortable and happy than we are about, grieving over sin or living for God, for doing the things that we know that He wants us to do. We're just happy to, and I'm not saying we are living this way, but this is the way the world is. Make all the money you can so you can just live it up and have fun. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Deuteronomy talks about this as, "But Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. You grew fat, stout, and sleek. Then he forsook God who made him and scoffed at the rock of his salvation." That's such a sad account. Someone who God blesses to the point of excess, and then he forsakes God and scoffs at the rock of his salvation. Jesus once again says in Luke chapter 6, "But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you shall be hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep." And really, that really goes back to what James says in verse 1, but this whole indulgence, it's not going to last forever. You can eat today, but guess what? You're going to be hungry tomorrow. Every day, we're hungry again. In Timothy, Paul writes to Timothy, 1 Timothy, "But she who is self-indulgent is dead even while she lives." So we can use our money poorly, either be self-indulgent or just pack it away in the barn, pack it away in the bank, whatever. Fifth thing I want us to notice is that money has implications in future judgment. And really we see this throughout all of the verses here. Just starting in verse 1, "Woe to you, come now you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you." Miseries that are coming upon you. That's a judgment. Even then, we talked about how the things can rot and spoil and corrode, and really that there's a judgment in that. But it's interesting when he says corrosion. He says corrosion will be an evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasures in the last days. We've talked about the last days before. The Christians of that day believed they were living in the last days, and we believe we're living in the last days. And in a sense, and I'll say eschatologically speaking, we are in the last days, and they were in the last days. The last days began after Jesus was ascended into heaven, after he was resurrected and then ascended into heaven, and then the last days begin. And the reason that there's so many of these last days is because Jesus is merciful. God is merciful, and he's giving opportunity for more to come to him. But we are living in the last days. He says, you have laid up treasure in the last days. And we don't know what day Jesus is coming back, but we know he's coming back soon. And if we are saving our money, if we are saving everything we have in the last days, we're not going to have time to use that money to do what with it? To serve God with it, to spread the message, even to feed the poor. And then he goes on when he talks about the laborers who mowed your fields, you have kept back by fraud. And then he says, are crying out against you. And the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. There's several places throughout Scripture. This should be like an echo. You should be thinking of all of these places. And I looked up just a few. In Genesis 4, you're familiar with Cain and Abel. And what did God say to Cain? What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. You know, God remembers. He hears that cry. Genesis 18. Then the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. In other words, there was an outcry that came to his throne, and so he came down to see what they had done. In Exodus chapter 2, during those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning and remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So once again, we see this cry coming to the throne. In Exodus 3, the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and have come down to deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians. He goes on. In Deuteronomy chapter 24, in the law, we read, you shall not oppress a hired worker who is poor and needy. It's exactly what James is talking about. Don't oppress a worker who is poor and needy, whether he is one of your brothers or one of the sojourners who are in your land within your towns. You shall give him his wages on the same day before the sun sets, for he is poor and counts on it, lest he cry against you to the Lord and you be guilty of sin. And so James is probably recalling this very verse when he says that their cry will be heard at the throne. Now, we don't want to take advantage of people. We don't want to use wealth against those who are poor. Then in verse, let's see, which verse is it? Verse 5, he uses this phrase, you lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. A day of slaughter. Now if I can find my place, because I keep losing my place here. Fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. This really calls to memory the idea of the fattening the calf for the day of slaughter. But there's an irony that James is adding here, a layer of irony that he's adding. This is looking forward to a day of judgment. And we are fattening our hearts for the day of judgment. The day when, and I don't believe it's us Christians, but that's what is happening here, is that there is a coming judgment. And if people who have means live this self-indulgent life, just enjoying the riches that really God has given. And God gives riches to the unsaved. He causes it to rain on the just and on the unjust. He gives riches to the unsaved. And he gives us, and we're not using those things, investing those things in the kingdom, then we're essentially fattening our hearts awaiting that day of slaughter, that day of judgment. Think of the parable in Matthew chapter 6, where, let me just read the first verse here. And now, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. So when we have money, we have to make sure that it has its proper place, that it's not something that we serve. It's not something that controls us. We mentioned earlier that Paul wrote to Timothy, he said, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving, this envy, this covetousness, that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs." Go down just a few verses to verse 17 there in 1 Timothy 6. He says, "As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy." You know, God provides the riches that we have. And we thank him for those riches, but it doesn't end there. He gave us those things for a reason. And if we are not using them according to that reason, then we are becoming like the rich that he describes here, haughty, setting our hopes on the uncertainty of riches, because they can just vanish, can't they? No. He wants us to set our hopes on him and to have faith in him. And John says in 1 John 2, "Do not love the world or the things that are in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and the pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires, and whoever does the will of God abides forever." So what does he want us to do with our money? He wants us to invest it really in eternity. And the sixth thing I want us to notice here, and really it's not so much in this particular passage, but I just want us to understand, money presents an opportunity. Money presents an opportunity. Paul says in 2 Corinthians, "And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things, you may abound in every good work." You know, you don't have to spend so much time working to be able to, have what you need. And so then you can spend the time doing every good work. As it is written, "He has distributed freely. He has given to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way to be generous in every way, which through us will produce thanksgiving to God." Saw a video, I think it was yesterday, might have been this morning, I can't remember. They all run together. I wasn't prepared to share this, but I'm going to share it anyway. There was a young lady sharing about they going to like North Carolina and rebuilding houses because of the terrible storms that they had there. So they were going and, rebuilding houses, and they have limited resources, and they were like, okay, so these houses need to be rebuilt, and they were going and looking for people to help. And this group of men, this church from Kentucky had sent a group of men there, and they went and I can't remember the exact, I wish I could remember all the details of it, but they saw this need, and they came back the next day and they said, we want to help build these houses. We don't have the money. God's going to provide. So they proceeded, and the funny thing is they were about to build a church building in Kentucky, but they said, we want to do this. We want to build these houses. So they built those houses, and then I can't remember exactly how it came about, but there was this other group that was coming in, and I think they were called Bent Nails from Tennessee. And they said, we're looking for houses to build, but all these houses are they're kind of like late. And it turned out, they said to the men from Kentucky, all these houses that are already built, we want to come and build your church. And so they came and they built the church there in Kentucky, and she showed how there's only like 150 people in that church. God provides. He will multiply. He will enrich in every way. We will be enriched. Why? So that we can be generous in every way. In Deuteronomy 15, we read, you shall give to him freely, and your heart shall not be grudging when you give to him, because for this the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in all that you undertake. For there will never cease to be poor in the land. Therefore I command you, you shall open wide your hand to your brother, to the needy and to the poor in your land. God blesses us for a reason. He doesn't bless us so that we can hoard. He doesn't bless us so that we can abuse other people or use it just to fatten our souls, fatten our hearts, to fatten our bellies. That's not why he blesses us. He blesses us so that we can have what we need, but he also blesses us so that we can bless other people. Just want to close with this. James calls us to be careful with the riches God has given us, not squandering them, not living it up or hoarding them, but so that those riches may serve his purpose, both in providing for physical needs. We need to do that. We need to provide for physical needs. But physical needs are temporal. More importantly, he wants us to be meeting spiritual needs. That is, bringing and I'll say, the bad news of sin and the good news of the gospel, the good news of Jesus, the Redeemer, to the world. He doesn't want our treasures to be just temporary. He wants us to invest our treasures. He wants those things to be eternal and the benefits from those to be eternal. Well, I hope that this wasn't too discouraging of a message this morning, because I really don't, and I said earlier, I don't believe that we have have this particular problem, but we do need to guard ourselves against allowing the riches to become an idol. And all of us have a certain amount of wealth. So this is for all of us. But at the same time, I think that we can all say that we're thankful for what God has given us and for those places where he's allowed us to bless others because of what he's given to us. Let's continue as a church and as individuals to be generous and loving to the people.